Today we'll be looking at notes 1.4, the Declaration of Independence. And so we're looking to see kind of the purpose of the Declaration of Independence, kind of what events led up to this document being written, being created, and then also kind of what the Declaration stands for and kind of how this begins the process for our government. So setting the stage for revolution. In an attempt to collect debt from the French and Indian War, the British enacted a series of taxes on the colonies. So because the war was fought in America, the brunt of the taxes were placed on the colonists. And this set a chain reaction of rebellion by the colonies and force by the British. So here are just kind of a few of the different events and acts that came about. Sugar Act, Stamp Act, we began to see the phrase no taxation without representation. Tea Act, Boston Tea Parties, the Intolerable Acts, the Boston Massacre, and all of this led to rumblings of independence and meetings called the First and Second Continental Congress, and eventually a war for independence. So because the colonists were so upset, they began talking about, why are we still subjects of the British Crown? No one's representing us. We have all of these different new taxes and acts being imposed upon us. And so it begins to be an option, should we try to form our own government? But of course that doesn't happen right away. And then with this underway, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, and it inspired support for independence. The drafting of the Declaration. Left with no choice but to push towards independence, the colonists drafted a document to explain the reasons for separation and validate it. So the purpose of the Declaration is they are declaring their independence from Great Britain, and they're going to explain in great detail why. They base the document on Enlightenment ideals. A committee of 5 is delegated to write the document. So John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and Thomas Jefferson. So the bulk of it gets written by Jefferson in about 2 weeks, and this would become the Declaration of Independence. So key aspects of the Declaration. So it's highly based around the Enlightenment thinker John Locke's idea of natural rights. These are unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights cannot be taken away because they are granted by their creator. So this idea that every person, man, woman, everyone, should be entitled to these unalienable rights. It was validation for the rebellion found in the social contract, that they derive their powers, just powers, from the consent of the governed, and that you have the right to overthrow your government. So natural rights, social contract, 2 main Enlightenment ideals seen within the Declaration of Independence. It also blamed King George III for crimes against the colonists, natural rights as English subjects. On July 4th, 1776, the Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Britain's 13 colonies ceased to exist. So the actual document, if you break it down into parts, here's what it covers. It's actually not that long of a document. We will be reading it in class. So part 1 is the ideals for writing the document. The Declaration sets forth the founders' belief about the purpose of government and explain how it is created. So they're going into their ideas of what a government should do, what it should do for its people, and what it should not do. Part 2, arguments. This lists the rights of the citizens, explains that in a republic, the people form the government to protect their rights. So the government has a duty to protect its citizens. Part 3 is the list of grievances. So this is all of the complaints the colonists have against the British government, King George III, basically giving reasons of why they want to be independent, why they're declaring their independence, all of the different injustices they feel have been done to them. And part 4, the conclusion, the bond between the two is done. We're saying we're separated. I always like to compare the Declaration of Independence to a breakup letter, and declares that they are free and independent states. After the Declaration, each of the newly independent states was asked to draft their own written constitution. No European nation had a written constitution at the time, It tested Republican ideas that would later be used in the U.S. Constitution. So the 13 original colonies, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So each of these different states will write their own state constitutions. So features of these state constitutions, we all see elements of self-government. All states established republican governments with elected representatives. Voting rights differed based on race, gender, and status. We also see a separation of powers. Each state had 3 branches of government, a legislative, executive, and judicial. All but Pennsylvania had 2 different houses. It also showed examples of limited government, meaning that they were all distrustful of a monarchy. They don't want to give too much power to their government. Also limited to power of the legislative bodies, annual elections, term limits, and separation of powers. Powers of the governors was kept weak, and individual rights. 7 included a Bill of Rights for its people. So this is the end of the notes. You want to make sure to go back. There are only a few different key terms, but this will be a good reference for you as you're reading over the Declaration of Independence to kind of see how the Declaration is broken up into the different parts, kind of what the purpose is in those different areas about defining what a government is, their list of grievances, and kind of how they are establishing their new independence.